Dr. Mitchell Moore and Dr. Dutta Gupta. How's that? Can I?
Excellent.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry that it's taken me that long to figure it out. But I do think that life, as Senator Johnson was saying, does consist in choices. I've been baffled by the choices that Congress has been making, been baffled by the choices that some colleagues on the other side have been making around when it comes to taxes. Why it's well, I'll read the question, and then I'll tell you why I think it's baffling. I just want to remind everybody about the Trump tax cuts. If they are extended, as Dr. Corrin said they should be, they're going to have an annual cost of $350 billion a year. Unpaid for. Not a dollar of that has been paid for. $350 billion a year. That is more than double what the expanded child tax credit and earned income tax credit from 2021 cost. The difference between these two things is that the Trump tax cut overwhelmingly, to a degree that's almost impossible to imagine or fathom, helped the wealthiest Americans while leaving pennies for low-income families. It is so hard to believe this that I hope people will pay attention to this, especially people who supported the Trump tax cuts and the idea that somehow it was a middle-class tax cut. As I mentioned earlier, when we were having the conversation with Dr. Rashidi, and I'll ask anybody who wants to refute these distribution tables, if they can refute these distribution tables, half of President Trump's tax cut went to the top 5% of Americans. Half. That's 7.5 million people out of a country of 330 million people, 7.5 million households to be precise, with an average income of almost $800,000. They got, because of the Trump tax cuts that some want to extend, they got a $150 billion tax cut from Donald Trump. At the same time, the bottom 40%, you'll see it over on that end where you've got the poorest 20% and the second 20%. The bottom 40%, that, unlike the top 5%, which was 7.5 million people, the bottom 40% is 63 million American households with an average income not of $800,000, but of $22,000. To come to Dr. Rashidi's point, those columns represent where we put half of our credit. The rest of the half goes into the other, by and large, other working people there. But those folks that were at the bottom, those little red lines at the bottom, they got 5% of the Bush tax cuts. The two lowest quintile groups in America got 5% of the benefit. The richest 5% got over 50%. None of it was paid for. I wish my colleagues were here to have this discussion right now. None of it was paid for. Life consists of choices, as people said. And when I go home to red parts of Colorado and blue parts of Colorado, and I take this distribution slide with me, they think that we've been smoking something that's now legal in Colorado, or worse. That's what they think. Can't believe it. You're going to see the economic distribution in America in a minute, but they know the last 50 years, since we began this trickle-down economics and this outsourcing to China and Southeast Asia, and they know that the people that have benefited from living in that global economy because of their education, and by the way, I hold nothing against them. More power to people that have succeeded in an economy that hasn't worked for most people. They have worked hard to earn what they have earned, but it is impossible to look at these slides and not realize the benefit that the last 50 years have accrued to them. and the lack of benefit that literally has accrued to everyone else in America. And when I go home and I describe this, people say, they say the same thing Senator Johnson says, which is, this is so complicated, I'm not sure I understand it. And what I say is, okay, well, let me give you an example. This would be like if a mayor in, the Trump tax cuts would be like if a mayor in Denver or Durango or Grand Junction or Cortez or Greeley or Colorado Springs or Pueblo or Alamosa or Springfield, if any mayor, and by the way, those are Democratic places and Republican places, if any mayor said to their constituents, I am going to go borrow more money than we've ever borrowed before, and their constituents, being Coloradans, would say, that concerns me. I'm worried about that. Why are you're going to borrow more money than we've ever borrowed before? What are you going to do with that money? Are you going to invest in our schools? No. Are you going to invest, to combat the mental health epidemic that American children are facing as a result of COVID and the way social media has interacted with them? No. Are you going to invest in our water infrastructure, which we desperately need? Nope. Are you going to invest in our libraries, our roads, our bridges? No, no, no. What are you going to spend the money on that you're going to borrow all this money from our children to pay for? We are going to take more than 50% of it, and we're going to give it to the top 5% of taxpayers in the city and expect it to trickle down to everybody else. We're going to give it to the 2 richest neighborhoods in town and expect it's going to trickle down to everybody else. That is the set of values we're pursuing. We're going to borrow, we're not going to pay for it. We are going to borrow every single penny of that. And by the way, we're going to chastise people that try to do anything else for the people that are at the lower end. But we're going to borrow that money, send the benefit to the 2 richest neighborhoods, and hope somehow that's going to benefit the rest of us. That was Donald Trump's tax policy. I hate to say it, but it's true. The numbers don't lie. Those were what the numbers were. And let's remember, let's put this up, and Senator Whitehouse, I'm coming right to you after I ask this question. Let's remember the backdrop here, which I've been talking about all morning long. This slide goes from 1973 to the present, although you could take this all the way back to the Great Recession. And what it shows is that the top 1% of Americans, that's that red line at the very top, the 7.5 million wealthiest Americans are the ones that have seen the fastest income growth over that entire time. They've decoupled from everybody else. Everybody else almost has been flat. If you squint even harder, you see the top 1/100th of 1%, which is 25,000 Americans who benefited the most from the Donald Trump tax credits, President Trump tax credits, who our economy has reaped the biggest benefits on. This is a tragic story in our country, tragic. Between the First World War and 1980, average incomes grew from 4 to 5 million for the wealthiest folks. That's not a huge leap. But since 1980, these incomes have grown to an astonishing $32 million a year. That's an unimaginable amount of money. And life is about choices. President Trump made a choice to reward the wealthiest people among us, and he made a choice to leave the rest of America behind. That was his choice. They masqueraded, they made it look like there was a middle-class tax cut because they had a little bit of a tax cut there, but it was tiny in volume compared to what the rest of the credit looked like. And we made a significantly different choice in 2021. It's true, Dr. Rashidi. I think our choice was far more targeted than you are saying, and certainly far more targeted than the Trump tax cuts if your effort was to try to provide some relief to working people, if your effort was to provide some relief to the middle class. And we said, as you testified, half of the tax cuts to the 63 million poorest households. And it's a choice that I am happy to defend in red parts of Colorado and blue parts of Colorado. And let me just get out of the way of Senator Whitehouse. So actually, I will, well, let me just say, could you compare Dr. Mitchell Moore and Dr. Dutta Gupta? Could you compare the wisdom and long-term benefits of the expanded child tax credit versus the Trump tax cuts? And I'll come to you guys in a minute, but let me do this, and then we'll come to Senator Whitehouse, Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you, Senator.
Yes, sir.
Yes. So the TCJA, or Trump tax cuts, as you pointed out, made a series of changes that mostly benefited middle and upper income households. And I will just note that your chart, if we could pull it back in time, you were right to say that the top decoupled, because actually from 1943 to really the post-war period, 1945 to 1973, all of those lines would have been growing together. And that stopped right around 1973. So this made particularly little sense in light of this long-term trend. But just to give an example, a full-time year-round minimum wage worker benefited with a $45 increase through the Trump tax laws, child tax credit changes, while somebody making $400,000 a year in a married couple could benefit, each of them have 2 kids, could benefit with a $4,000 increase. And I'm sorry, but it doesn't cost 9 or 10 times as much for a wealthier person to afford the same necessities for their kids. So this was absolutely a question of priorities, and the Trump tax law underscores exactly how we need to focus on refundable tax credits, particularly full refundability, if we want to deliver support to families through the tax code.
Dr. Mitchell Moore, and then I'm coming right to you. You're in. I'm going to go to Senator Whitehouse, and then we'll come to you, Dr. Mitchell Moore.